Hello everyone, welcome to our virtual field trip to Campbell Valley Regional Park in Langley. The main purpose of this trip is to practice identifying some of the common native plants found in our local forests. But also we're going to learn about the type of forest we have in our region, see some of the animals, as well as some of the species introduced by humans. The photo you see here was taken from the car park at the northern entrance to Campbell Valley Regional Park. And that gives you a good sense of what the forest is like. However, before we go any further, it's very important to make sure that you have studied the first PowerPoint presentation that shows you how to identify and describe the common local species of plants and animals. That's essential before you carry on and do this part 2. Once you've done that, we can get started. As you can see from the map, the Little Campbell River flows right through this park, which was established in 1979. We're going to follow the Little River Loop Trail, which is marked in red, and it's just under 2.5 kilometres in total length. This entire area was once farmland, so there has been significant human impact to the whole area, and we'll see some of this evidence as we go on our journey around our trail. Here we are at the entrance to the Little River Loop Trail. Have a pen and paper ready so that you can write down the names of the plants and animals that you identify on each slide as we go. At the end of the presentation or our walk, I'm going to provide you with the answers so you'll be able to test how good you are with your identification skills. As we follow the trail looking at different plants and animals, I want you to think about biodiversity and how important it is. As humans, we are dependent on our natural environment to provide us with different types of vegetables, of meat, of different fruits to feed ourselves. We get a lot of enjoyment from eating and tasting different types of food. And even the spices we use to flavour our food, also many of them come from plants. Biodiversity also provides us with building materials and furniture and tools and so on. Indigenous groups in particular recognise the value and importance of biodiversity, and it's reflected in their deep-held cultural values. Parks like this give us an opportunity to understand and explore our relationship with our natural environment. It's also a great escape from the busyness of our daily lives and a chance to relax and recharge our batteries. So the recreational value of parks is also very significant for us. The forest we see here is fairly typical of what we find on the western coast of BC, and it's part of the temperate rainforest biome. Think of a biome as being a big ecosystem. This type of forest is characterised by having mild, wet winters and warm, dry summers. The forest, as you can see, is dominated by dense stands of tall conifers, and they form a canopy layer that blocks out most of the sunlight from reaching the forest floor. You can also see in the photos that underneath this canopy layer, there are smaller trees and shrubs that make up a secondary scrub layer. And underneath the scrub layer, which you can't see because it's so thick, is a third ground layer of vegetation where we find low-lying plants adapted to shady conditions. So while the forest may appear to be a random arrangement of different plants and species, it actually has quite a well-defined structure consisting of 3 layers. If we were to travel to the eastern coast or eastern side of Canada at the same latitude, we would find a deciduous forest biome instead of a temperate rainforest biome. Why is that? Well, deciduous trees grow well in temperate latitudes, but they have large leaves which lose a lot of water by evaporation. On the eastern side of Canada, they experience quite moderate rainfall over the summer, so they can grow well. But on the west coast here, our summer is quite long and dry. Not necessarily all that hot compared to some places in the world, but it is very dry for a number of months. And the conifers are much better adapted at surviving these dry summers than most deciduous trees are. So this is why we have coniferous forests on the west coast and deciduous forests in the eastern side of Canada. The next few photos were taken along the trail you see in front of you. Let's find out if you can identify some of the plants in each of these three layers that we spoke about. Okay, this is slide 5, so it's time to grab that pen and write down the name of this plant if you can identify it. This plant has long trailing stems and it makes up part of the ground layer in the forest. Each leaf consists of 3 distinct leaflets. Another couple of questions for you to think about and maybe write it down on that sheet of paper. Would this plant be vascular or non-vascular? And can you give a reason why? This particular specimen is growing at the base of a tree, and you can also see some green plants, some very small green plants growing here too. What type of plant do you think they are? This is a common native plant in the ground layer of the forest. It has stiff, waxy leaves to reduce water loss over the dry summer. And it also has little leaflets which have a serrated edge to them with quite sharp little teeth on them to deter predators from eating it. This is one of my favourite plants making up the ground layer of the forest. The arrangement and shape of the leaves is quite distinctive and it should be easy for you to recognise. The small structures you find on the underside of the leaves are a handy way to check and confirm if your identification is correct. Indigenous groups used this species for flooring and bedding material. You should be able to tell me the name of the kingdom that these organisms belong to. They serve a very important ecological role or function in the forest because they break down the dead remains of plants and animals and recycle the nutrients to make them available for other organisms to grow. Most of the organism lives underground and it's not easily visible. These are just the reproductive structures of the organism. This is one of the plants that make up the shrub layer in the forest, and again it happens to be one of my favourites. The leaves have an alternate arrangement and they're quite oval in shape. And of course you can see it produces a very attractive red coloured berry. As well as identifying the name of this plant, you should be able to tell me if it's vascular or non-vascular, and also what major group it belongs to. Is it a moss, a fern, a gymnosperm, or an angiosperm? This plant is a tall shrub that also produces red berries. Birds and other animals eat the berries, and this is an effective way for the plant to disperse its seeds. The small tree on the right is also part of the shrub layer. You can see it has multiple branches that extend out in different directions and often arch over, and sometimes it forms a nice kind of archway to walk under as you're going along the trail. You should be able to identify it from the photo on the next slide. This is a small deciduous tree that has quite distinctive leaves and also seeds. Make sure you count the number of points on the leaf before you make a decision. So far, we've only travelled about 100 metres along the trail, and I've shown you just a few of the species that we've seen along the way. Hopefully you're starting to get a sense of the amazing diversity that our forests have. They truly are quite amazing. Hopefully you've been able to identify the plants I've shown you in the ground layer and also the shrub layer. Now we're going to see how good you are at identifying the larger trees in the canopy layer. Have a look at the one on the right. The bark is fairly thin and it has these vertical striations along it, quite brown in colour. And look at the leaves. They're not so much needle-shaped, are they? They tend to look more like scaly in their appearance. So can you identify this species? This tree should be easy for you to identify. It has very distinctive cones. These trees have very thick, chunky bark that acts as an insulation layer to protect the living cells underneath against the heat from bushfires. So this species is able to tolerate and survive bushfires much better than most other species in the forest.